Hello, everybody. How you doing today? It's your boy Jedi Granville back with a second of my '80s rambling. And as I said before, will this be like Empire? Will this be like Aliens? Will this be like Superman 2? Better than the original? I don't know because see, that's one thing about the '80s. It's funny how, as I mentioned before, the first half of the decade, you know, had its own feel and flavor, but it's almost like the second half was it somewhat better or more of a, I don't know, kind of a just a learning curve of what the first half of the '80s was. Well, we're going to get into that, and as I mentioned before, I don't know if this is going to be as you know, long or longer than the first half of this discussion. I mean, it can play both ways. We don't really know. I mean, that's one thing about the '80s. You didn't know what to expect from this decade. I mean, it's a decade that really says a lot, but leaves you with a lot of unanswered questions. At the same time, leaves you with the fact that okay, you are in control of what you do, but you have to make the decision for yourself. So, without any more further, discrepancies of what I'm talking about, let's get into it, and let's kind of really break it down in terms of, say, maybe style, maybe music, maybe movies, maybe television. But I'm gonna start with this time. I'm gonna start with the movies, something that I love. It's a subject that I'm very familiar with because I'm a big fan of the movies, and I always will be. It's something I've always had just a flavor, very into, understanding of because it's a medium that I particularly like more than books. I mean, my mom, my late mom, bless her heart, she loved reading. I'm just sorry that I never got that niche to do that, to learn how to. I mean, when I say learn how to read, know how to read, but get my feels for reading. I don't know why. I mean, reading was just not something that I was entangled with. And sad that it's not the case. But the thing about it is, certain films have taught me that just because that medium is okay doesn't mean that that's not all right either. I would say if you take a book and turn it into a movie, I would say stick with the book because usually the book is a bit more in itself. Really, it generates more stuff. You know, not to say that the whoever rates or translates book to film is not doing a good job. It's just like, is it doing justice to what the book is? So, with that being said, let's let's kind of go back a little bit at the tail end of '84. And this is where, things were different. Everything was a pretty much an incredible year. But once we switch over into '85, we're getting a sense of, different things and whatnot. And it's slowly changing, but not that much. And one of the things that I've realized, as I was coming into my own, was the sense that, okay, here I was really because I was a teenager this time. I was starting to really start to, you know, get to my independence. It was something that I was striving to want to have because, you know, I'll be honest with you, as a teenager or as just an individual in the world, I wanted to learn out. I wanted to move out, and when I say move out, I wanted to, explore the world because that's what I wanted to see. But there were restrictions. There were certain grips. I mean, certain vices that say, "Oh, you can't do this." And one of the things about the '80s, it was like it was a smorgasbord of whatever was coming, and I feel that it in itself was something that I was beginning to learn in terms of what do I want and what do I want to go for, you know. But as I say, I'll eventually get to that point, and that's the thing I'm going to kind of bring up in a second. Now, when dealing with film, uh, this is the thing that I want to bring up is that not just the tail end of beginning of '85 to '89, but I mentioned something about as we was coming off the cusp of Vietnam. It's funny how the term Vietnam was more prevalent now than it was in a way back then during the time when it was going on until where it ended. And one of the, as I mentioned before, I mentioned Rambo. He started out something that would be the catalyst to would lead to something later on in the later half of the '80s. Rambo, or I should say, First Blood was a phenomenal hit you know for Sylvester Stallone. He was in Rocky 3 and everything, but the thing about it is it was not meant to be a picture dealing with action. It was just meant to be something of a cautionary tale about how men, or people who fight in a war, any war, still have to suffer from what is known as PTSD, you know, and did something that we would not expect, which is, okay, let's make a sequel. And at this time, sequels were still very rare, but it was coming into their own. They were becoming very fluent in a way. So let's go to, you know, Rambo First Blood 2. And this would kick off something that was not expecting because this was something that was not so rare, even in the 70s, even in the early 80s. Action pictures. Rambo First Blood Part 2 was the catalyst to start off this amazing amount of, you know, action pictures were coming. And just to give it a notch, Stallone's film pretty much was a, you know, like I say, just a continuation of what was being brought out in the first one. But this had more, just amazing amount of action. I'm pretty sure that's not what they were going for, but unfortunately or fortunately, it started this moment that would lead to others. And that same year, because it came out in '85, that same year, here comes Commando. And it was kind of a start because Arnold Schwarzenegger was starting out, little by little. And he was in Terminator, the original Terminator. And still, this was not meant to be, that film was not meant to be action. It came out a year before, but it was starting something that was coming in the latter half of the '80s. He started in Commando, and it was more of a, how can I say, throwaway or kind of, I could say pretty much a slap in the face to, to a Stallone's picture and saying that, well, we're going to do something more over the top. We're going to do something more of it's like it was kind of like that. Okay, skip a few years, and well, I would say skip a year after that, after '86. There wasn't really much of a trend of action pictures, but go to '87, and '87, I could say was a pure trip in terms of oh, this is what we're doing here, a whole bunch of action pictures. I mean, it was lots of action pictures, in terms of through the time. But this year in '87, there were many action pictures coming out, and some that you may not even think of as action pictures. We had the first original Lethal Weapon, Danny Glover, Mel Gibson. Um, Believe it or not, the film Beverly Hills Cop 2, you know, surprisingly is more action oriented than the original Beverly Hills Cop. It was more humorous than the second than the second one. The second one much heavy handed action than it is. Then you have to remember you have movies like RoboCop, Paul Verhoeven classic. I mean, it's sci-fi but total action oriented no matter what. And don't forget, there's another Schwarzenegger bit, Predator. Predator, oh my God, it is one of those films that just spawned, a tradition of, what you call a great, just a great, incredible villain, yeah, villain, you know, with the Predator, and for long, and it's the same with RoboCop, but at these times, these will become iconic, you know, pictures and characters, to say the least, and they will spawn remakes, unfortunately, and that's sucky about that. But the thing about that is, these will spawn these kind of movies, and one of the things about these films is they kind of inspired me a lot in terms of I didn't realize that I mean I'm a teenager, okay, at this point. I'm a sponge. I'm a human sponge soaking in all these so-called action pictures and whatnot. And just to give you an idea that this was kind of more of a replacement for me in terms of what I was experiencing at this time, which was I didn't have a father figure at the time, and I needed something. Even though I could say Godzilla was, that, father figure, but movies like this were a takeaway from reality that I was experiencing in my life, and I feel like seeing these things was just something that really helped me to grasp and gravitate to knowing that, wow, yeah, I mean, action pictures can be, what they are. They're entertaining. They can be actually can be, say, philosophical. Like RoboCop. RoboCop is very philosophical. Watching it, but it gave you an idea that you can have the mixture of the two, and like anything, the mixture of the two kind of makes you feel that two worlds can collide and they can be in conjunction with one another to say make a good piece, make a good piece for people to understand. So with that, we can say that a lot of these pictures really would be the catalyst for a lot of the pictures that would come later on in the 90s, and one of the even more influential pictures that would come out at the latter half of the 80s was, of course, John McTiernan Die Hard. Die Hard, kind of like what the original Alien, what the original Star Wars, which was A New Hope, before it became New Hope, they inspired other people to create pictures of their own, in terms of kind of, copycats, as I like to say. But the thing is, Die Hard was an action picture, but it was an action picture with flair. It was an action picture with, context. I mean, it was not one of those pictures that, okay, you just go into it and it's like, okay, this is what this is, and it's just a, brand old, shoot 'em up, bang bang kind of thing. No, this was a movie that had so much substance, so much underlying texture to it, so many, outstanding, you know, just as Dick Donner would say, when he did the original Superman, it had a verisimilitude quality to it. If you don't know what verisimilitude is, look it up. I'm not going to try to explain to you, but basically, it's. But I can explain to you because I know what it means. It's basically taking or kind of making the feel of something that's over the top, or just somewhat on, not, take something that's fantasy or unrealistic and make it naturally uh, natural. Make it feel like it's something real, part of the world that we live in. You know, and like I say, Die Hard really brought that kind of sense of what action pictures, as I said before with RoboCop, philosophically, Die Hard was saying that you don't have to feel like you're losing structure with characters in there. If anything, characters are the reason why you do a film. I mean, true enough, Hollywood would become aware of doing that. If something makes a lot of money, we got to make more, and it becomes a factory. And it's like, well, okay, where do you stop with the art, and where do you begin with the money? You know, because that's kind of way you do with films nowadays. I mean, let's be honest. Look at the films today, especially now. We get crap. We get such crap. The majority of the art that we see is lost. You know, there are films that are truly, truly, just binding in itself, artful, but unfortunately, the money overshadows all of that because the so-called industry makers lose sight of what's important, and this is something that, in a way, which is weird because the '80s was a time of commercialism, and just money making. It was kind of like that, but the thing is, with film, it was not like that. At this time, I mean, it was not abundant like it is now because back then, we make movies. Yeah, true enough, we're going to make money, but we're trying to structurally make a good story. And it's kind of almost a foreshadowing of what was to come. It's like the '80s in this moment of time was saying that you are going to see what is actually going to transcend into the future. It's almost a cautionary tale of saying that yes, the movies that you see will become something more, I ain't gonna say horrendous. It will just be more in a way that it's going to not say, hey, the art is going to be what is going to be projected, but what we're getting is something that's really saying that, oh, we're just making some big horrendous money making grab thing, and it's like, and then truth be told, I have seen some films that make a lot of money, but I'm looking more at what is inside more than what's on the outside, you know. And unfortunately, like I say, a lot of people overlook these things and don't pay attention to it because it's like, well, it looks pretty good, but I mean, I feel like it's gonna make a lot. It's like, okay, then you're not getting it. And the funny thing is, the '80s was kind of a projection of saying that we're still doing art, but we are not, in a sense, looking to say, let's make money. I mean, it's like we're not trying to make, but we are going to make money. But unfortunately, this is what is all about. And it's interesting enough, since we're talking about art with movies, James Cameron was really coming up with his own here. I mean, the '80s was his baby, and when he did Terminator, the first Terminator, it was, pretty much a sleeper hit. Then he did Aliens, which was a massive hit at the time. And you can say that his art was really something that he was projecting because he was saying something. And it was, yes, he was seeing the, you know, what was being produced, what was being said, but he was really saying something at this time. And even when he produced Alien Nation, you know, it was saying something about, you know, how colonialism, colonialism and how someone who's from another country tried to fit in with the familiarities of their new surroundings. You know, I mean, it was something that artful, in a way, is being broadcast. You know, and it's that's the thing about that. And even when he did The Abyss, which is my favorite Cameron film, I love The Abyss. You know, even better, more the special edition of it, the extended version. The Abyss really was something that was being honed in to saying, okay, look at and this is what I was going back to for about war. We was on the tail end of the Cold War still at this moment. This was a cautionary tale that we as human beings really do want to, you know, do something to ourselves because we're not. It's like we want to live in this savagery. We want to live to say we want to kill our own species. You know, and the abyss was saying that here's an outside species that said we don't want to do this. We don't like seeing other creatures do harm to one another. And this is where I say the art is being projected here as to say that that is what is being, you know, honed in. And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why I see Cameron, you know, amazing director, amazing, you know, artist. You know, I feel his, I feel his ego has gotten lost over what he does now because he's only doing Avatar films at this moment, and it's like, okay, dude, you was on a roll when you was doing multiple things other than just the Terminator, you know, the Abyss, the Alien, you know, and even with Titanic, I feel like he was doing. But once he got to Avatar, it's like he shuts all that other stuff down for imagination and, you know, creativity, and that's one of the things I feel like, you know, the Abyss. I mean, the not the Abyss, but the '80s was a sense of, you know, you have an incredible gift expression, but later on in life, it's like it becomes lost. And I feel like that for me is what was the thing about these films. You know, they were expressions. They were templates of what you can say. Don't let your, you know, don't let success burn you out. Don't let success turn you to something that you fear the most. You know, because the '80s was something that I feel that really let you know that it's okay, you know, to be creative. It's okay to be artistic. It's okay to tell a story, you know. But unfortunately, the '80s was a sense of knowing that you could lose your innocence. You can lose your, not so much your creativity, but you can lose yourself in what you do, you know. And as future texts have shown, yeah, a lot of actors, directors, writers, some of them have unfortunately, you know, become come to that point. You know, I mean, it's some have survived that, but majority have not, you know, let themselves stand strong, staying humble to what they are. And I can tell you now, a film that I feel that really just states this, that I really enjoy, that I really like, that came out of the '80s. You know, I mean, I like to say not to say that all the '80s films are not great because they all inspired me, I love, and everything. One of the films that I really enjoyed, that really liked, that kind of let me know that you can get older, but you should never lose what is a kind of a persona of who you are, what you're inside. That's Explorers. Explorers is a 1985 Joe Dante film that pretty much explores the kind of, as I say, as a sense of, you're a child, but you have the innocence of knowing that, you shouldn't be afraid to explore. You shouldn't be afraid to experience things. You shouldn't be afraid to know that sometimes what's right in your backyard is still a good thing. And it's one of the things that when, despite, like I say, I went to see it in the theater. And the thing about this is that the film told me that it is not about, you know, okay, you're gonna be, you're not gonna be, young forever. You're not gonna be a kid forever. You're not. That's just how it is. That's just how life is. You have to grow up. But you can still have that sense of what made you feel good as a child, as a teenager, that it doesn't get lost. It doesn't get buried under, a lot of scrutiny, such as paying bills, taking care of responsibilities, let's being an adult, which I am, I'm an adult, I'm over 50, and I know that what being a 50-year-old is going to be, or anyone, as an adult, you have to have responsibility. But you should never let yourself get lost of what is being human, which is just know that you can still have a great sense of, you know, joy, that you keep that innocence in your heart. And the heart is so valuable to make you know who you are and what you want to do. And explorers help me to realize, like, hey, you don't have to lose that innocence, but it teaches you to be aware of what cautionary tales or cautionary moments go on in our world, you know. And it's funny that explorers doesn't seem like that's what it's doing, but to me, that's how I translate it. And it's funny that that's kind of what the 80s is. It's a translation of what is around us. And, a lot of things, you know, it depends on how we look at things, how we see things, how do we translate that. But that being said, let's explore something else, which is what I talked about in the first video, the music. Look at the music in terms of what it was being broadcast at that time. Now, the music as we heard it, it was more, you know, classic rock, more, a little bit of rap, But the thing about that is they would incorporate into the late 80s more and more with different types of, genre music, like the occasional more of the boy bands that were coming out at this time, or even single, you know, teenage boppers, as I like to say, like Debbie Gibson or Tiffany, and let's face it, New Kids on the Block, they were coming out at this time in the late '80s, and they kind of changed. They were kind of a structural thing that changed from what the '80s were, the early '80s were, till that particular point. And the funny thing is, there was a boy band that came out at that time called New Edition that pretty much was a kind of a start of the boy bands. Although there was some that was started way before then, but these guys started it a little bit earlier. But it really didn't kick off until the New Kids on the Block really set it on fire at the time. Because after that, we did get In Sync, and then we got the Backstreet Boys later on in the '90s, and I mean this is how it is. I mean it was a catalyst to start for something else. And like I say, Debbie Gibson and Tiffany were another example of future, you know, songstress like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and some others. I mean, they were, as again, catalysts to other things, and it changed the structure of the '80s from the early to then more because, as I say, when you're a teenager, especially if you're late teenager, these things really start to affect you more and more with what was going on. And I know for me, it would really because I'm gonna be honest. I'm guilty of this. Tells you how much of a very layered, structured individual I am. I kind of liked Tiffany and Debbie Gibson. I kind of like their music. I mean, I like "Only in My Dreams." I actually like the remake of Tiffany's song with what's the song? Damn, now see this is what my brain is getting off a wire because I'm forgetting what the name of the song is. I think we're alone now. Yeah, I mean that's the one I had to actually sing it to think about it, but it is. And I guess because I'm a teenager, that's why it was so effective on me to listen to that, and I can say I enjoyed it because I was a teenager. I was teen. I mean, that's just who I was. But that's just to say that I didn't enjoy the music of, hard rock, heavy metal, pop, even rap, because they really started to explode at this time. And the thing about it is that those are songs, those are genre songs. How I told you before, some things influence other things. They were incorporated into, and it was more at this time. They were incorporated more into, the soundtracks, even on television or mostly films. And the funny thing is, there was a lot of there was a lot of movies that incorporated some either hip hop rap soundtrack or with a heavy rock bass sound. I mean, I can give you great examples. Um, if anyone's ever watched uh, Stephen King's, Maximum Overdrive, ACDC, I gotta say, I love that soundtrack to that movie. I mean, Hell's Bells, I mean, that's kind of stuff. Who made who? Who made you? I mean, dude, I mean, that film really incorporated something like that with, the that soundtrack. And like I say, a lot of films that did this was like, I don't know if anyone's ever remembered this film called The Hidden. It had a I mean not a rap but a hard rock you know song at the end of the film, which was incorporated at the end. I love that, and it was an action picture. It was an action sci-fi picture. And another was the Blob, the remake of the Blob. It had a a hard rock, song at the end of it, like incorporated it. And I enjoyed that film too. But the thing about it is, like, say, they were doing that a lot with films at this time, which was popular at that time, which was more bass, more film. I mean, myself, more music heavy, rap, hard rock at this time. It was structured like this. I mean, because you're going to use something that's popular for the moment, might as well use it for that moment. I mean, you shouldn't do it all the time for other films, but this was the thing that was really popular for that moment. Now, true enough, you still have movies that do this, to this day, but I think they kind of played out in a way. I mean, yeah, you still had it when the '80s began. I mean, when the '80s, yeah, in the '90s, kind of like I say, a residue of it. But eventually, people would start to see like, okay, this is not exactly what we want. And is it more of expression or just more what's like I say what's popular for the time? We don't really know. I mean, this is how, as I said again, influential things were for that time, and how it is even still to this day. With people taking music and how it incorporates. But I have to say, the films of that time has something that rarely is discussed, or even to this day, even incorporated, and that is good old, of course, orchestral soundtracks. In terms of whether it be science fiction, action, or whatever. And a few of these films would, especially at this tail end of the time, still incorporated very good orchestral music. Surprisingly, you know, and the funny thing is, it wasn't used as much at the latter half of the end of the '80s, but they were so abundant in the early '80s. I mean, like I say, the two Star Wars films, Empire, Return of the Jedi, the second Superman film, even the third Superman film, um, the two, well, not actually, all three of the Indiana Jones films, John Williams, all pretty much had orchestral music, but it was more fluent in that early half of the '80s than it was in the '90s. But you did have still some of them, the pictures that did with this, you know, Lethal Weapon 2. I mean, like I say, Lethal Weapon 1 and Lethal Weapon 2 had orchestral music. I mean, you did have some come, kind of, as I say, saxophone type film with Eric Clapton and David Sanborn, but the majority of the soundtrack, orchestral wise, was by Michael Kamen, who also did the soundtrack, the score for Die Hard, which I love in that film. I love that the score in that film. But the funny thing is, it's funny how music will incorporate even more, translate even better when you listen to how it's being projected, like Roadhouse. Here's a film that is a modern day Western, and he actually did the score for this film, Michael Kamen. I was taken aback when I first saw this film. I'm thinking like, oh, it's going to be more, you know, kind of country, kind of Western type kind of score, everything like that. But when you hear the orchestral music in that movie, it changes the whole scope of what it actually is. And I think that's another thing about, especially with '80s or even till now, you shouldn't expect. I mean, even though, like I say, we was hearing a lot of the orchestra. I mean, a lot of the hip hop music, a lot of the you know, hard rock music in movies and whatnot, especially at the late '80s time. There was some people who were still brave enough to say, we're going to try something different and incorporate what could be, or change the tonal, change something tonally with the music style. And that's what things I could say about music, especially at this time, that I didn't understand in the '70s, probably because I was an eight, I was like I said, I was a '70s child. Music can make or break a film in terms of what it's trying to say. And if you incorporate, and I put like this: if you incorporated, just regular, maybe the music that you expect in a film, it's like, okay, that's what's going to be used. But when you hear a certain music, whether it be rap, whether it be hard rock, or orchestral in a film, it always changes that motif. And I feel that that's something about the 80s that I feel was really structurally sound in terms of you shouldn't have been shy about trying something, trying something different, trying something. And I think that's why, some people hire, composers like Hans Zimmer now. Hans Zimmer, you know, um, trying to see Steve Jabalki. I think. Well, basically like this: the music that you hear in, like, say, maybe the Batman, no, the Dark Knight, you know, films with Christopher Nolan, it has that structurally sound kind of motif that it gives it a structure that you wouldn't expect, but then it's like, okay, that's what that's being said. And Hans Zimmer, he did most of the Nolan films then, but you wouldn't expect that. You think you're going to hear something else, but that shows right there, like here, in the 80s, especially the late 80s, you don't know what's going to be used to exclaim or express what you're trying to do film wise. And like I say, like I say, films at this time were really, you know, dominant in terms of that, but also how the music really influenced what was being said and what was being brought out. And I feel like that's one of the great things about that with the 80s, especially at the latter half. The 80s really had great, you know, orchestral composers that brought something you know, to these genre films. And I mentioned Michael Kamen, you know, but I should mention also like people like Jerry Goldsmith. They did pretty well with what they did. Uh, I should mention Alan Silvestri, who gave us a great score with the original Back to the Future. You know, that's another example of what I mean. I'm thinking you're just going to hear some, just rock style, or you know, kind of whatever. What can I say? Like like hard rock, kind of music. I'm thinking it's going to be something like that. When you hear Alison Veshery's music for this score for that film, as I said before, changes the whole structure of what you expect. And that's what I feel that is something that we should never think that this is what it's supposed to be. Nothing is supposed to be just like that, you know. And that's kind of the thing with music, especially at that time, late 80s. You should expect the unexpected. And you can't say you're going to expect anything from what happens in at that time, because like I said, we mentioned, things that were going on at this time, and I feel that these things happen to happen with what we're going through, and it helped us to let us realize, like, anything is possible and anything should be allowed. You know, even now with what things were going on in this world, it just accept with what we see, what we do, and you know, if you have your opinion about what it is, the opinion is like, okay, that's what it should be or not should be. Okay, you have your opinion, but don't make it a big thing in terms of, like, okay, what is right is your opinion. What is right in your mind is your opinion, but it is not always going to be with that person. That's what they feel like they want. That's what's going to get. And also forgot to mention John Horner, James Horner. He's another example of a good composer at this time. He did he did Star Trek 2. He did Aliens, and he did a couple others this time. But like I say, this was at that time, and like I say, the 80s, the late 80s was just structurally well known with the soundtracks and with music, in any way. But something that I'm about to get on topic now, I've talked about something that I like, and something I like a lot. Let me get involved with, let me put out there about, as I say, music and movies and whatever, TV, television, they were escapism from what was going on at this time. Now let me jump into something that I think that I kind of overlooked in my first part, but I think I need to bring up now. I mentioned before the Cold War. The Cold War at this time was a time where I said I really felt it more in the early 80s. But in the late 80s, the second half of it, I began to realize that that's just the world we live in. That's just how man is dealt the hand, and that's how they deal with things, you know. But even then, this was a time when AIDS was going on, and we had people who were being infected, who were dying, and it's again, this is something that you have to understand and deal with, and realize that that's just how things are. And I think that's one of the things I had to, understand and look at. So that being said, we had things like the shuttle disaster. When Challenger blew up, that was something that you never would expect would happen. But it did. You know, and then Chernobyl. That kind of coincidence. Would happen in our lives. I mean, things like that. And it's just an amazing topic to talk about because, see, I know with me, young mind, not really understanding, but learning more and more how in our world as, you know, whether it be a young adult, child, you start to see things in a different light. And it made you realize, like anything, like all things happen, but they happen in terms of why are they happening. You know, we could say Chernobyl happened because somebody made an error or whatever. I mean, there's nothing that man makes is perfect. There's always a flaw in it. It's always going to be that. And same could be said about with Challenger disaster. That happened because of something that was not structurally sound in the rocket itself. You know, but the thing about Cold War is that this is something that could be avoided. This is something that doesn't need to be incorporated in our lives, or it doesn't need to be that. War is not something that is necessary for human beings. But unfortunately, one of the things I realized looking back, in the 80s, that man is always going to be this animalistic entity. And it's like peace is hard. Peace is hard because that's the thing they talked about a whole lot, you know, at the time. They weren't talking about peace. They were doing peace treaties. Reagan was, and Gorbachev were trying to make peace, but it's like the art, life. No, art was imitating. No, life was imitating art, or at least art was, ingesting life. And it was like, can you make a cautionary tale of why we shouldn't, be at war? What's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of doing anything? And funny thing is, one of the films that I feel was incorporated really well that explained or kind of foreshadowed this was a film that came out at the tail end of the 80s, Miracle Mile. I saw this film, and the thing about this film is that it's just something that happens by accident, per se. It's letting you know that, okay, your whole world can collapse in a blink of an eye if someone's going to go to the structure, if they're going to go to the tail end of saying, we're going to blow the world up and we don't care how it affects anybody. And the funny thing is, this film lets you know that, okay, y'all so ready to just destroy one another, but you're not ready to try to make peace with one another, you know? And I never really imagined that somebody would be that insane, that, thirsty for, destruction with one another than what that movie was bringing out, kind of, encapsulate what is being said. And I just said to myself, it's like, why is it that you're so quick to do that? But it makes you realize that somebody was thinking, like, okay, we're going to make a difference here, try to do something different. And to me, when the Berlin Wall came down, at the tail end of that decade, it was an eye opening thing to say that somebody wants, not the governments, but the people who live in it. They want, you know, they want something to be. They want to live in a peaceful world. And even though peace seemed like it's so hard, you know. And at that time, it was all I can say. It was all about. It's like we can easily do the destruction thing, but peace is something that we got to really strive to really want. And knowing that when it came down, it was like, okay, somebody looks at this and someone's saying that we're going to do something different here. Somebody wants to do this, you know. And it's just amazes me that you know one of the things I can say at the end of the '80s is that we can see a true nature of man. We can have the destructive side, but we can't have the peaceful and creative and make love by war motif sense of living. And again, this goes back to something that a friend of mine said, which was Deborah Miller. She said that it was a sense of the loss of innocence, and the innocence, yeah, it's always going to be there. But the thing about it is, you can't be ignorant to what is around you. You can't be ignorant about why these things are happening. And when I look at, when I look back now, we as human beings, especially at that time, we have so many things we can do creatively, but it's like some of us are so quick to do something destructively. We're so quick to want to do these things. And looking back at that, I realized that the 80s was more, I ain't gonna say a smokescreen, but I think it was a way of, especially for my generation, coming up, it helped us to say, don't be, it's like, yeah, take your mind off all these things, take your mind off all the craziness that's going on and what is going to be going on in this world. But at the same time, know that it is real. It is there. It is always going to be there no matter what we try to do. We can speak on peace. We can give our 2 cents about why and how and what could be changed and everything. But simply put, we as human beings always will be this entity, this species that's almost thrives on just animosity and whatnot. And well, let's be honest. Look at our world today and tell me I'm wrong about that. I mean, this world is so hung up on the structure of politicism and about who should be this, who should be that. I'm like, and the funny thing is, I don't feel either one side is better than the other, But someone would disagree with me on that wholeheartedly, completely, and say you're crazy. Choose one or the other. No, I choose neither. And I'm not. Look, I'm not saying this to really say that you should not choose or not. It's like, no, I'm saying that we should not be afraid to stand up what we feel is who we are. You know, if anything, the '80s has taught me is that the '80s have shown that we can't be allowed to say, let your expression, go unheard. Your expression needs to be known. Your expression needs to be told. And if you don't agree with whoever makes an expression a topic, it's like that's okay. You ain't got to. You ain't got. You do not have to agree with what anyone says. That's okay. But you don't have the right to belittle them, break them down, and tell them that what you're being said is a bunch of bull crap. That's not how a society works. That's not how a debate works. A debate is to say, okay, we're throwing out one another's, comments and everything, but we should be wise enough to say we understand enough to say I will so-called agree with you to disagree, but that's okay. You can disagree with that person and leave it at that. But do not make it seem like, oh, you got to believe and say that this is what I am. This is who I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm like, no. We as human beings should not ever do that. We should only rely on the fact that if this person doesn't agree with me, fine, great, move on. But when you go to the tail end of saying you got to push come to shove, kind of, I'm gonna make sure that if you don't agree with me, we ain't gonna be friends. We ain't gonna be like that. Is so how much is a problem with this world today that we do not focus on trying to make the world better by just understanding that if this person feels this way, okay, move on from that. But at the same time, this is why we as human beings still be in this stuck purgatory of I gotta be right and this person's always gonna be wrong, or vice versa. And I feel that that's what's the thing about the '80s have shown me or taught me, and why I kind of go back to it because it was my youth, it was my coming of age moment in life, but also that it really was something that teaches me and taught me that you know your innocence is going to be somewhat not so much forgotten, but it's something that you have to put aside in order to live in an adult world and understand that the world that's around you is not a it's not what it is. It is what it is, but at the same time, you have to make the world that you live in for yourself. And I think that's what the '80s. I think this is one of the reasons why I feel the '80s is a very unique and very kind of overlooked decade, for what it is, and why that one part is different from the other part, the other half. And I know with me, it really made me realize that it helped me to grow for who I was as a child to a young adult. And now looking back, I realized that it was just a time that made me realize that you don't have to be afraid to man, because I was a very introverted, very shy, but very terrified individual coming up, because I was just like, what I say, what I feel, what I it's like they're random, but they're not important. But that's not true. All of us have a very important. Everyone's mindset is important. Everyone's unique, and everyone should never be afraid to be who they want to be and what they want to express. And with so much expression that come out of the '80s, I realize and influences. I'm so glad that I lived through this decade and I'm so glad that I did not allow myself to be quiet as I got older. I'm glad I got to open myself up and not allow myself to feel like I have to be this, just some, random person and just not, you know, not be, not be stuck in a box and stay there. No, open yourself up and let the people know who you are. And I feel that that's what the 80s, to really summarize what the 80s is, it was saying that we're kind of like what the Twisted Sister would say, we're not gonna take it. No, we ain't gonna take it. We're not gonna take it anymore. And I feel that that's exactly what was being said for whoever lived in it, whoever did what they did. It's like we have to let our voices be known. You know, our voices have to be expressed. Our voices have to be heard. Our voices have to be known. You know, and for someone who's a late bloomer in doing that, it took me time to do this. And I have to say, with that, so I'll, because I like to say, I'm gonna conclude in a little bit, but when the 80s was almost over with, with so much of these things gravitating to me and what I was feeling, what I was feeling, and how I felt that I didn't have a voice. It's funny that I almost wasn't here to tell this tale or tell anyone these things, but most of my friends, most of my people that I know me know this, but there was a time where I had suicidal thoughts. You know, I know this is really personal, but I feel I have to tell this because this is the reason why I need to say this. I almost literally took my own life, but it shows me that had I done that, I wouldn't be able to express myself the way I am now through this, through other things. And I guess with so much of the things that came out of the 80s to overwhelm me, to let me know that you don't have to be quiet, I should have known back then that, you know, it was going to take time. It was a slow burn for me to understand that your voice will be heard, but you have to learn to not, you know, you have to learn not to feel fear by that. Yeah, fear is a good thing, but fear should not be the catalyst that stops you from expressing yourself in whatever you do in life. And thankfully, I didn't go that route. And thankfully, I came out of that thing not so much unscathed, but it was a learning process for me, and it taught me a great many things. And I'm happy to say that yes, this was an emotional but informative and a really good thing. You know, it was very cathartic for me because I feel like it was more to this than just the structure of the 80s saying that okay, this is what the 80s is about. The culture, the influences. It's more to it than that and what the 80s was. And I think that's what it's all about. The 80s was a time that really opened me and so many others up, but at the same time, it made you realize that whatever you learned, whatever you took from it, you should never stand with just what you've been taught. If you're a person who thinks outside the box like me, you realize there was more to just that than what you saw. You know, and thankfully, I'm here to say that it is such a joy knowing that I could share this so much rambling with you, and it's still here to this day to be told to y'all. And I'm so glad that I was here to say these things. So, if the latter part was too dark, in terms of what I said, I didn't mean for that to be so much. It was just that as I said, it's an expression, but I need to say it. I need to do that. So, but with that being said, I feel that that's what the '80s, in terms of all this, as I've talked to the second one, to the first one to the second one, the '80s to me will always be that particular decade that is so unique that you can't erase that. It's too ingrained in our brains. It's too ingrained in our, you know, what we are, and it's always going to be that, which is what you was part of. And since I was a part of that environment, it taught me that that environment did not break me. It didn't. Uh, it didn't destroy me. It just made me say, "Hey, you are someone, and like all others who are out there watching this, you are someone too." In the '80s, just like anything else, you know, your core belief, your core memory, your core everything of who you are never dies. It's always going to be there to, hey, the end of time. And just remember that, because the '80s taught me a lot, and I'm pretty sure it taught a lot of others too. So we can always say that the '80s, hey, just like any other decade we might have lived through, they were very sound in what they were. So, but that's about the end of that, and I feel that that's all I can be said. I mean, it's probably more, but you know what? I feel that this was a good learning curve for me, but hopefully for you also who watch this. And I just want to say thank you for all who might be listening, who will watch this. And hey, you know, like I say, whatever I incorporated to encourage you, you encourage me to keep on going and doing what I do. So, to that being said, I will close out. And like I say, this was a great talk. And the '80s, as I say again, never died. So, with that being said, y'all take care. You always be patient. And I always say this, keep that kaiju love alive.